Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the CMTA webinars. Tonight is going to be an interesting presentation by Gilles Bouchard about the STAR 10-year anniversary. Having said that, I'd like to introduce Gilles.
Hey, Bob. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good evening.
All right, let's get started. Good evening, everybody. This is Gilles Bouchard, and it's a great honor to be presenting this webinar to you tonight. I'm the chairman of CMTA, and our family has been involved with CMT and CMTA for almost 15 years. Our son Yohan was diagnosed with CMT about 15 years ago. So it's been quite a journey for us, like for many of you, I'm sure. What I want to do with you today is give you an overview of the STAR program. And I appreciate the attendance. I think we have a large number of people on the line. We also got a lot of questions, and I will try to answer the questions that we got ahead of time through my presentation. And then Bob will also bring me new questions as they come along after. So we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Also, there were a few questions which were more like specific or more clinical. So those I think we'll just answer directly or direct you to doctors if we can, okay? So with no further ado, let's get started. As you can see from the logo, we're actually celebrating the 10-year anniversary of STAR. So we're very excited about this. It's been a very successful program. Nevertheless, I mean, we also realize that there's a lot of work left to do because as of today, there are still no treatments of CMT. So 10 years, I'm sure for people like you and for us with a son with CMT, it feels like an eternity when there are no treatments. On the other hand, 10 years is actually a short time when it comes to developing drugs. And in a way, that's how the whole STAR program was started. But 10 years ago, a few of us got together and we realized that while there was some good research and a few really brilliant researchers working on STAR, there wasn't really much going on in terms of research that would bring the drugs to market. And we asked ourselves, how do you accelerate all this? And we talked to some of the charities that were kind of leading the way there and kind of put the strategy together. And I want to share you just a few thoughts on the history there. But really, the first thing to look at is the challenge. It's extremely challenging to develop new drugs. It's been studied actually quite a bit. I'm just quoting a study here of 106 drugs over the last 18 years. And what it says is it takes 10.5 years in average to develop a drug and 8 years only from the part where you go from the clinic to approval. And even more scary, 90% of the drugs fail during the approval process, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. So we ask ourselves, how do we accelerate this, and how do we, basically from a business point of view, try to accelerate this process? And we looked at also some of the positives about CMT. There are actually some unique things about CMT which make it interesting, and we try to exploit those positive aspects. The first one, as you know, is the causes of CMTs, of at least the most common types, are very well known, and more that get discovered every year. It's what's called a monogenic disease, which means that the genetic causes are well known, which is not the case of many diseases, especially for the nervous system. Which means that we can test, we can create models, we can create animal models, we can create assays, which are really cells in petri dishes, so we can create stem cells, so we can test and create models of CMT, which is very valuable to partners. The other thing which is positive is that it's classified as a rare disease, which gives companies some advantages in the market. But even though it's rare, it's still fairly common. So there are a large number of patients, which is helpful for companies because obviously it's a big market, but also it allows us to have enough patients for clinical trials, which is very, very important for companies. And the fourth thing, which we see a lot currently, and we're going to talk a lot about this tonight, is that because of all the above, because we have those models, we can take advantage of the latest developments in genetic and neurological therapies. As you know, since the genome was sequenced, there's just been an explosion of technologies and applications and many of those actually apply very well to CMT. So that's a very positive for us. So basically 10 years ago, we went out and laid out 5 core business principles by which we're going to drive the STAR program. And we still live by those 5. And I think I want to go through them because I think they're kind of the core reason why the STAR program is being successful. And they're very important to understand also how STAR works. So the first one, and by the way, you'll see a lot of things go by 5. So like the 5 tips of the of our STAR here. So the first one is strategy. What does this mean? Well, the way most organizations work is, they collect money and then they ask for people to send them their best proposals, and they fund the best proposals that people send to them. And at the time we talked to a few leading organizations, I've kind of turned this around and realized this is nice, but it's really not the most efficient. What you want to do is get some strong thinkers together, get the best researchers, and help you define a strategy and really decide what needs to be done to solve this problem. What are the gaps? What elements of the puzzle are missing to find a cure, to lead the path to a cure? So what we did is basically, and so we're doing that, we always lead with strategy. We get together with the best researchers, and we have a really wonderful advisory board. And for each disease, they help us define what needs to be done to get there. What are the missing links? What are the gaps? And this is where we focus our investments. And we actually go to the best researchers, the best team, and ask them to put proposals for us to fill those gaps. Then the next thing we do, which might sound obvious, is we hold people accountable, which is not very common in the medical world, which means if they don't succeed, then we work with other people, which has happened before, or we don't pay them until they deliver or go through a milestone, etc. So it creates a lot of accountability in the system. And the other thing that's very important is we really require collaboration. A lot of scientists tend to work in silos and don't always want to share information. And we found that it was really important to get people to work together. And we've created some really strong teamwork across our advisors and teams here. And it's made a big difference. And the fifth one is partnerships, probably the most important. If you remember, it takes hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug. Clearly not the kind of money we have and we're able to raise. So we have to bring pharmaceutical companies to basically come into and play in this CMT sandbox, as we say, and bring the huge resources they have and the kind of money to develop those drugs. So our core strategy really was, let's find the gaps and to attract pharmaceutical companies and make it interesting for them to work on CMT and develop drugs for CMT. And that's been the journey we've been on for 10 years. And as you'll see, it's been a long journey, but we've made a lot of progress, and we see this progress really accelerating recently. And I'll give you some examples of that. So let's talk about partnerships for a second. So how do you attract partners? What makes it interesting for a pharmaceutical company to work on CMT? Again, 5 things. The first one, for the most important, where it all starts, they want to be able to test their compounds. So we developed a very extensive testing infrastructure. We created animal models where they had to be created. We created assays, again, those cell tests. We created stem cells when they were needed. We also work with companies who specialize in testing with animals, who specialize in analyzing tests. It's what we call the STAR testing infrastructure, and it's very, very powerful infrastructure. In fact, most of the companies now that approach us, they approach us because they've heard about this testing infrastructure and they want to work with us on testing their compounds or their drugs or their IDs. And you'll see as I go through the details by each disease, I'll give you examples of the things we've done there. The second thing is often companies know their drugs or know their technology well, but they might not be experts in CMT. So they want to have access to what they call KOL, key opinion leaders, which are experts in CMT. And it's why we built such a strong advisory board, because very often they get very involved with our partners and they advise them on CMT, and it creates strong teamwork and complementarity between their knowledge and the expertise of the companies. The third one is, it's very interesting, they always ask about community access. I always say that our community, which is a wonderful community for CMT, is our biggest asset. And it really comes across when we talk to companies because they want to talk to the community because they want to understand the disease. They want to understand what's called the burden of disease, how it affects people, how it affects people's life. Obviously, they want to understand their market. So almost every company, actually, they tend to have dedicated resources who are really focused on talking to the community. And the fact that we can reach so many people through our organization is a huge asset for us. And again, we thank you all for this being part of that. Like the fourth one is very important as well, is the clinical infrastructure. So once companies are done with the testing in animals or in assays, what's called preclinical, well, they want to test in humans and bring drugs to market. And this is where drug development becomes very, very expensive. Again, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in clinical tests and clinical trials. And the more people you need and the longer it takes, the more expensive it is. It then can really often be an inhibitor for companies to work on the disease. And by the way, it's specifically challenging in CMT because it's a slow evolving disease. So how do you tell that the drug is working in a slow evolving disease without spending years and years and years following people in a large number of people? So we'll talk a lot about what's done here, but it all started through what's called the INC, which is a great partner of ours, the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium, started by Mike Chai, with a lot of great scientists involved. And they had the vision to create this infrastructure like the Center of Excellence where they see patients, where the data is recorded, there's a database, they do what's called natural history, where we see how the disease evolves over time with patients. And then we develop what's called biomarkers, which is a way to measure the progression of the disease, which are faster than just the regular ones. So we can tell, the whole idea is, can we run clinical trials in just a few months with a handful of people and get a really good quality read whether the drug is working? And we made tremendous progress here, and that's a really attractive part for companies now. And last but not least, often companies also want financial support. Now that's very different for different companies. And what we've tried to do there and what we've learned is we have to be very flexible and we have to provide the kind of support that fits their business model. So that's why we do sometimes some joint projects, or sometimes we even give them access to some funding through investors and stuff like this. So it's very different, but again, we've learned to be very flexible how we can help the companies where needed. So those are the things we learned about to attract partners, and clearly it really has worked. So let me give you a quick overview of where we are. We have announced 5 partnerships. Those are the ones that are on our website, and I will say a few words about each one of those. Well, what's even more interesting for me, and by the way, for me and for a lot of us, the one thing we look at in terms of the measure of success is how many partners are we able to attract? How many phone calls we get a month about companies interested in working in CMT? And frankly, the last 2 years, it's just exploded. It's been really exciting. So besides the 5 that we've announced, there's actually 8 more companies that we have not announced because they want to remain discreet right now. You know, again, they want to wait until the results are published to go public. But we're actually doing work. We're doing testing. We're actually working together with those companies, those 8 more companies. And then even more interesting, we have a pipeline, and we're really talking in early discussion with another 15 more. And again, 3 or 4 years ago, it was only a handful of companies were working in CMT. So this is for the most exciting part. And I think that what shows that STAR is starting to work really, really well is this long list of companies that were actually doing some work on CMT, and even longer list of ones who are interested in trying to figure out how to work on CMT. And then also for reference, I've mentioned as part of our testing infrastructure, we have 5 wonderful partners who help us work with pharma companies through all the testing procedures and really become experts at working with companies, working with our experts to help our partners. So let me give you a quick update on the 5 companies that we've announced. Our first major partner was Sanofi Genzyme, and it's been a really wonderful partnership. Obviously a very big company, and we started by screening the whole library, and basically we're down to now 1 compound, and we're in the process of testing it. And we should know very soon whether it works and its toxicity, and then we'll decide with them the next step on this one. So that's been very exciting. But even more exciting is that we've actually grown that relationship, and we actually have now 3 other projects with Sanofi There's another family of compounds that they're very interested in, and we're actually testing those as well in CMT right now. They've also done some really good work with us on biomarkers, which hopefully will be published soon and we'll be able to share. And also we've done some work on what's called target discovery, where we work together on finding some other potential drug discoveries, other compounds that we could target at CMT, and that's led to additional projects I'll talk about. The second partner, which is very important, is Ionis. You've heard the announcement earlier this year. They use those little components called ASOs, which go straight to the gene and really counteract the negative effect of having a duplicated PMP22 gene. That was a major breakthrough because they were able to stop and sometimes even improve the situation in 2 different animal models. Again, it was really also the first and the best example of showing that when you reduce PMP22, it actually helps the behavior of the animal. So there was really a big breakthrough, and they basically now are working very hard in trying to design a drug for humans. Again, they had the drugs for animals. It's obviously a lot more complex and challenging to develop the drugs for humans. They want a drug that's very efficient, so that it can get to the nerves, that people can take it over the life. So that's most of the work going on with Ionis right now, and we're also in discussion with them about the clinical planning. Inflectis, we'll talk in the context of 1B and 1A. It's a company in France that has developed a very interesting compound that has shown some exciting results in 1B and also in 1A, so we'll cover those when we cover those diseases. Acceleron, you might have heard about Acceleron because they are actually recruiting for clinical trials right now. They have a drug that helps rebuild muscles. So while it's not a direct cure for CMT, it could really help people with the consequences of CMT, and in fact, in combination with other drugs, could be part of the solution for the CMT patients. So that's exciting, and it's moving along very well. And then recently, we announced a partnership with a company called Regency, and as we'll discuss, it's one of several companies that's working on what's called axon degeneration. It's a field that's seen a lot of development in the last couple of years, where people try to find ways to stop the degeneration of nerves. And this is one of them. There's a few others. And again, we're doing some extensive testing with them and a couple of others. Okay, so those are our partners. And before we get into the details per disease, one thing we try to do, again, to be the most effective with our resources and with our money, is to find initiatives that cut across all diseases. Personally, I think that's strategically something that's very important. And guess what? There are 5 of them. So let me go quickly through those, but what you'll see what I'll describe, then you'll see repeated in many of the disease slides, so we won't have to go through it over and over again. So the first one is really interesting. It's called gene therapy. And I'm sure most of you have heard about gene therapy. You've heard about CRISPR, about gene editing. It's a field that's been around for quite a while, but it's completely exploded in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think there are close to 1,000 clinical trials in gene therapy around the world. Now, there's only like 1 or 2 drugs. The first drug was approved in the US less than a year ago, so it's moving very quickly. But again, a lot of excitement there. And it's very relevant to CMT because with again, there's different kinds of gene therapies, and we don't have the time to go through a tutorial, and again, I'm not even competent to do that. But I really encourage everybody to go. There's some really good documentaries on TV or newspapers about gene therapy, and I really encourage everybody to look into it. It's clearly going to be a big part of our future here. But the basic idea of what's called gene replacement therapy is they take some genetic material and they put it in a virus, and the virus goes in the nerves, and this genetic material kind of compensates for the gene that's either missing or deficient. And again, that suits very well CMT because we know the genes that are deficient, and we have models where we can test it. So people are very excited about applying gene therapy to CMT. Now, a new branch of gene therapy that's exploding as well, and you probably heard about CRISPR, it's called gene editing. And the idea there is a little bit different, where you don't just put an additional gene material in the cell, but you actually go in there and change it. So you actually change the genome. And I'll tell you a bit more about the things that are happening there, but it's another area that's moving very rapidly, and it's also very relevant to CMT. Axon degeneration, I mentioned that before. A lot of excitement there, a lot of companies, a lot of science going to that. It turns out that there are a couple of really big markets for this that are driving this. One is chemotherapy, which creates a lot of neuropathies for people, and the other one is diabetes. So a lot of companies are working on these diseases, but they are very interested in applying to CMT. And remember, from a business point of view, it's always very interesting for a company to have a rare disease indication for medication, because they get the advantage of the rare disease while having the bigger market. So I think there's at least 5 companies we're working with right now on different approaches to axon generation, and we also launched several specific studies that we'll talk about in the various diseases. And one of the beauties of axon degeneration is it could apply across CMT types, even the ones that are not diagnosed. So it could be very helpful across the line. Biomarkers, I mentioned the importance of biomarkers in the context of clinical trials. In fact, I have a specific slide on this, so let's hold off for a minute on that. Cell and animal models, I covered this already, and you'll see that in every disease. It's incredibly important to have quality animal models, usually mice, sometimes rats, and cell models, what's called assays, or also sometimes stem cells. We can take people's skin samples and make stem cells, and then we can make neurons or Schwann cells out of them. And we've made incredible progress there, and there's more happening. And then gene discovery, as you know, we've discovered a lot of genes. I think we're up to 120, but there are still a lot of CMT which have not been discovered, especially type 2s. And it's very important to continue that, especially in the context that I mentioned earlier, that more and more of the new therapies are very gene specific. So we need to continue to discover more genes. Let's talk about biomarkers for a second. So again, a lot of this is in collaboration with the INC, which is a wonderful organization that's made a really big difference. And the CMTA supports the INC directly. Most of the funding for the INC comes from the NIH, but both the MDA and the CMTA provide additional funding. And then we also funded several specific projects on top of it. But basically, without getting too much in the details here, the first things people look at is elements in your blood. And I give you 2 examples here. One is called neurofilaments, which was some wonderful job done in London by Mary Riley's lab. And that's being published, and it's very promising. And then another project, again, in the blood, looking at what's called microRNAs, that was funded by the CMTA and John Zvarin and Mike Scheid, and also another company that we're working with on this. Also very promising, and this work is also in the process of being published. The other thing that we've looked at is skin biopsies, because you can actually detect levels of PMP22 in the skin. And again, another CMT-sponsored project with Mike and John, and that's being very encouraging results. The third one, probably the most exciting, is people have been looking at MRI of the calf muscle and looking at the fat content in the calf muscle. And it turns out to be a very good correlation of disease progression. So when you put all those 3 things together, we now think that we can run clinical trials over a shorter period of 6 months with maybe as few people as 50, which is a huge progress from really what we thought it takes years and hundreds and hundreds of people. Excuse me. A lot of this work started in CMT 1A, but now we are funding a lot of efforts to extend it to the other most common types. So you'll see a lot of this for 1B, 1X, 2A, and other types. Now those are biomarkers, are again elements that we look at in your blood or in your skin, but also the FDA wants to see what's called functional outcome measures. They really want to see the patients getting better. Are you walking better? Do you get better use of your hands? So the team has been really busy coming up with those scores, which are functional in nature and which try to capture how better people are or worse people are as their disease evolves, and try to do it in a way that we can see small changes and also in a way that correlates with those biomarkers. And the work is not done here, but there's good measures for adults. There's not a good measure for kids. And the good news is there's a major grant that was just approved by the NIH for the next 2 or 3 years to continue this work. So I think we're going to be in very good shape there. Okay. All right. And then another thing we're looking into, which is really interesting, is, I mean, all those things we talked about really have to happen in the lab or at the clinic. And the idea is, why don't we start measuring things in people's homes? So, you know, with the explosion of wearables, we're looking at a proposal right now to look at some sort of wearable device where we could measure people's gait, et cetera, when they're home, and would give us an indication the disease is progressing, but while being home, so it would give us a longer timeline. So again, something that we look into as we speak. Okay. All right. Let's look disease by disease now. Let me just get a drink here because I'm losing my voice. 1 second. Thank you. All right. So CMT1A. So as you know, CMT1A is created by the duplication of the PNP22 gene. So the most obvious thing to do is to try to decrease the level of PNP22 in the body. Several things going on here. Some we've talked already before. We have the small molecule screen going on with Sanofi. We have the ASO approach with Ionis. We are now working with another company who actually wants to use CRISPR to decrease PNP22, so that's very exciting. And this actually, the tests are just about to start on this. And then also, we're looking at a very interesting proposal to kind of combine a little bit the what I would say a gene therapy approach with an ASO approach, where you would use a virus to send a little piece of RNA into the cells to try to interfere with the PNP22. So this is something that's being reviewed as we speak. Now, besides the pure focus on PNP22, there's been a lot of work done over the years to see if there's other targets in the body that drugs could go after to help with CMT1A. One in particular that's shown some promising results is called P2X7. And basically, we are working with 2 companies right now. We have drugs that target this part of the body, this component, and they're actually both in testing right now. And we'll see how that goes, but that could be very exciting. And then I mentioned the work we've done to identify new targets, and that we started with some partners, and then we have actually funding a project that's in full speed right now to, again, look in your body, look and see if there's other elements that we can identify that could help decrease PNP22. And then we mentioned axon degeneration. This applies to all CMT types. We might not start with CMT1A. I'll explain why. But if the work progresses well with other types of CMT, it could be very applicable to CMT1A. And then muscle regeneration, the work that Axelon is doing, already mentioned. Biomarkers. We talked about that already. And then we got a lot of questions about the Farnex announcement, so I want to say a few words about this. I think you probably heard about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Farnex was really the only company who's reached a phase 3 clinical trial in CMT ever, I think, announced kind of early results of their test. And the results, I'd say, were encouraging. They showed that in some patients, the disease improved, in others it was stable, and a few others it got worse. But it was clearly better than the control group and the placebo. I think the general consensus around scientists is that this is interesting, and we want to see a lot more of the data. So what Farnex announced is that they would be sharing a lot more of the data as it becomes available throughout next year. And I think everyone's really eager to see the rest of the data. They will have to do this, obviously, as they engage the FDA. So it will be very interesting also to see how the FDA engagement happens. And we think all this will happen through 2019. So again, a very interesting announcement. I think, again, they are a little bit the trailblazer, being the first company. So we all have to really help them in a way, because they are defining how the FDA and the agencies think about CMT. Again, nobody's been there before. So we're working very closely with them, and all the patient advocacy group are really involved with this. because it's very important. It's our first chance, in a way, to make the voice of the CMT patients heard to the FDA or to the European agency. So it's very important for us to all work together and basically make the voice of the patient heard through this very first drug that's going through this right now. So very interesting, and we'll keep a very close eye on it. Again, I think we have a meeting with them in a couple of days, and we're going to see the best way we can help them. CMT1X. By the way, on the right, it's the CMT1X gene, and I think there are over 400 different mutations on the gene that created CMT1X. Lots of work on 1X, biomarkers we talked about. Also, I want to mention natural history that was just published. This is really important, and I mean, I will continue to encourage everybody to go to the Center of Excellence and to go back, because then our scientists can notice, not only study a CMT, but see how it evolves over time. And that's what's called natural history. And this is one of the most important things that companies and pharmaceutical companies want to see. To really help them figure out how the disease evolves after the drugs get administered to people. So there's good data in 1X, and I think it continues to happen also in other diseases, but we need more and more patients to do that. We just approved this year the funding to develop new models, new mouse models of CMT1X. Pretty much all the work on 1X has been done with a mouse, but the whole gene was removed, and it's actually a very good model. People really like it, but we feel it's time to get more precise model with specific mutations. Especially, as remember, we mentioned now so many of those genetic technologies are coming into play, so we'll need better models that we can just look at the specific gene mutation. So this is funded and it's in progress, which leads me to the next item, which is we've had a very good project co-funded with the MDA on gene therapy with Dr. Kleopa, and he's actually shown some really good results in mice where he was able to get the gene material to the Schwann cells in the mice, and it did have an effect. So we continue to push on this project, and we try to find ways to make it more translational, where how do we bring this to humans? So I'd say very exciting proof of concept and a lot of focus on the translational piece of that. Another thing you probably heard about for CMT1X is the role of inflammation was highlighted by Dr. Martini in Germany. And there are several companies that we've talked to that have drugs that target this the element that he identified being part of the inflammation. The challenge there is that it's hard to find a drug that does that doesn't also affect your immune system. So those are the conversations we're having with companies, and see if we can find a drug that does go after this inflammation factor, but doesn't also wreak havoc in your immune system. And last but not least, axon degeneration, very important for 1X. As you probably know, 1X is one of the types of CMT when we see fairly severe axon degeneration. So we are evaluating right now a proposal to actually do a specific experiment to try to highlight what we could do by axon generation with a specific target. So again, lots of things on CMT1X. Now let's move to 1B. So 1B, again, lots of mutations. I think there are over 200 mutations that have been associated with 1B on the specific gene, but they really fall into three categories. And the good news is now we have good mouse models for each one of the categories of CMT1B, what's called the early onset, mid onset, and late onset. So that's been very helpful as we talked and work with companies. And for instance, in Flectus, we are continuing to do some testing at the animal level with them. And we are in the early stages of clinical planning. By the way, if you look at the little picture on the bottom left, you see three little pictures. The left one really shows the myelin around the axons for a normal mouse. The middle one is a 1B mouse, so you see it's really degraded. And on the right side is a 1B mouse treated with Cephin. So that's why people got really excited about Cephin, because it showed some really good results in the mice. And the other good news is Inflectus and Cephin were recently approved for the phase 1 trial in Europe. Phase 1 is when you actually go to healthy patients and just test the drug for safety. So if you combine this with the animal model trial we're doing with them, probably soon after that, maybe late next year, there will be, if it's all positive, they might be able then to move to clinical trials in humans, which would be very exciting. The other part of the puzzle is what's called the UPR, the unfolded protein response, because cephin seems to be acting on this UPR, which is basically the fact that the gene makes the protein form in a different way. And so what Mike Shai published is he kind of analyzed all the CMT1B mutation and figured the ones that were affected by UPR. So those were the ones that would be most likely candidates to work with cephin. And the last thing which is also interesting is they've also had some good results with CMT1A, and as we speak are doing some tests there. So we'll see how that goes as well, but you could potentially have clinical trials with both diseases if all goes well. Axon degeneration is also very applicable for 1B. In fact, we funded a project which is active right now, just like in 1X, to see basically if the specific target has an effect with CMT1B. So this should be exciting. We should have the results on this probably early next year, and biomarkers as we mentioned. So that's CMT1B. Lots of activities as you can see. Now CMT2, I kept the slide blank because it's going to be a very busy slide. And you probably noticed I didn't say 2A or 2E. I put all the two together because we find a lot of technologies now apply across CMT2. So why is it so exciting? I mean, basically a few years ago, there wasn't much going on in CMT2, and all of a sudden we see a lot of activities. And there's really two interesting things happening. The first one is all those new genetic technologies I've talked about, they tend to apply really well for CMT2 because if you recall, CMT2 affects neurons, and the genetic material of neurons is actually located in the spine, and also neurons, 90% of your neurons are in your central nervous system. So the people who are working on those technologies for the brain or the spine are very familiar with neurons, and also they're very easy to get to deliver a drug. So they usually want to start to try that on CMT2s. And the other part is, based on our strategy, is that we have developed some really good models of CMT2. We have two excellent rat models, which our partners really love. There's a good mice model that's been around. And we also have some good stem cells for CMT2. We've been most successful with stem cells with type 2s. So all this coming together shows that there's a lot of interest in CMT type 2. A lot of those technologies apply across CMT2 and will carry over to CMT1, but it's a good place to start with a lot of those new technologies. So let's go through it. So I talked about the models. Gene therapy. So a lot of focus on gene therapy, especially for CMT2. What we did is we put together a summit in Baltimore this summer, and it was really incredible because we asked the world experts in gene therapy to join us in Baltimore and help us basically not only educate ourselves, but help us build our strategy. And we had in the room probably a dozen of the world leading experts in gene therapy. It was really amazing to see the quality of the people, their willingness to come work with us, and also the openness. They were really sharing data very openly, and it was incredibly productive. And basically what we've been doing since then is we've been working with them to define a very specific gene therapy strategy, which we're not quite ready to communicate in details, but there's a lot of activities, a lot of partners involved, and it's something that's really, really exciting to us because it applies obviously to, we'll probably start in a couple CMT2 types, but this has broad applications over time across all CMT types. And also I want to mention that there's a family that's done some really amazing work on CMT2D, and they are pushing a kind of single patient initiative, and they've approached us to work together with them, and we'll support them wholeheartedly, and because they're also helping pushing the envelope here. So we're very excited about this as well. Axon degeneration, again, and we have an experiment going on with a partner in CMT2A. They will again tell us how promising it can be there. And again, at least 5 companies are basically willing to work with us on this, so very exciting. Now, CRISPR, that's another really interesting area. And I'm sure you've seen it on TV. You've heard a lot of discussions about it. We've been approached by UCSF, and you might have seen their video about CMT, but they're really interested in working on CMT, and they really want to work with us. And they were part of our last STAR meeting. We have STAR meetings twice a year. The last one was just 2 weeks ago in San Diego, and it was just an incredible meeting. I think all the scientists there were just glowing about, this was the best meeting ever, and the quality of the new people coming in, and the CRISPR folks were there, and they really lit up the room with their ideas. I mean, this is a little bit exploratory. It's still a bit science fiction, but it's moving so fast, and I think it's such broad application that we are incredibly excited to work with them. But basically what they want to do is, they actually call it CRISPR surgery. They will take some blood samples from a given patient, and then from those blood samples, they will grow them into stem cells. Those stem cells, they will grow into neurons, and then they will then edit those neurons with CRISPR to remove the defective gene or fix it, and then they will reintroduce this into the body. So it sounds like science fiction, but they're actually doing it. And again, this could move very quickly. And again, they're very excited about working on CMT and working with us on this. So another really new technology is coming into the fray here. And then the other one that we talked about is we need to continue to discover new genes, especially for CMT2s. So we actually increased our funding for Dr. Zuckner in Miami, who's doing an incredible job with his database, and he's discovering genes almost on a weekly basis. And then a couple of disease-specific initiatives. We actually did a screen of approved drugs for CMT2A. Unfortunately, the hits were not that convincing, so I'm not sure we're going to follow up with that, but at least we did it, and we have a good assay to do that. And then there was a paper that came out last year that showed some specific drugs could really help with the activity of mitofusin. And we are basically doing a pilot program with them to try to take this further. So this could be very exciting for CMT2A. And in CMT2E, thanks to the work that was done on creating the stem cells, we are just starting to do some drug screening using those stem cells, which is very exciting. So lots going on in CMT2E, and also some people ask questions about CMT2C because the gene is the same as on some version of SMA, and they were asking about the SMA drugs that hit the market, but again, and I'm not a specialist there, but the SMA drugs that are on the market are for a different gene than the one that is for CMT2C. Now, this being said, there's some good work going on in CMT2C in a couple of centers in the US, and some of those things we're talking about would apply across all of CMT2s. All right. CMT24. Now, CMT24 is very well suited for gene therapy because it's monogenic, but also because, remember, CMT24 is recessive, so both genes are affected, so there is what's called loss of function, and this should be very attractive for people working on gene therapy because they can replace all the genes. So we've had this project with Dr. Cleopa, co-founder with the MDA, that was actually showing some promising results in CMT4C. That's been included, obviously, in our Baltimore discussion. And then, again, there's a family doing a wonderful job on CMT4J, pushing also a gene therapy approach. And we are in discussion with them how we can work together and support them. So a lot of exciting things for CMT2 and gene therapy, for CMT4. And of course, axon generation would apply there as well, and gene discovery as well. All right. So I've covered a lot of ground here. And I apologize for the speed here, but again, it's an exciting time, a lot's happening. But as I said, we're not done yet. We have a lot more work ahead of us than what we've done. So it's really important to support STAR. And I just want to explain to you from our perspective why it's so important, and more important than ever, to support STAR. The first one, of course, we went through. It's a really exciting program, and a lot of partners are coming to it. I mean, again, people speak by joining us, and the list of companies keeps growing, and there's no better measure of success and credibility for me than this. But besides this, we're also very careful about our resources. If you look at our financials, they're really best in class, and we continue to improve them. If you look at most organizations, they tend to have overhead levels in the upper 20s. The CMTA historically was around 20%, which is really good. If you look on Charity Navigator or other areas, it's actually quite good. But we've actually improved it. We made a lot of tough decisions the last 2 years because we want to continue to improve that. And if you look at last year's financial, we were down to 12%, which is absolutely world-class. And I'm really proud of the team. And we actually think we can sustain kind of this low teens level looking forward. So very, very world-class performance here. And the other thing that's just very special that I really am proud of about the organization is the people who are making decisions, the board members, also major donors. So in a way, people put their money where their mouth is. About 20% of revenue comes from the board itself. So the point there, we're going to take care of your donation very well because ours is there as well. So we are all major stakeholders here. We're all in. We believe in it. And again, we speak with our own money and our own fundraisers. And I think this is very unique about this organization. It's very special. And I can't say enough about my colleagues on the board and their dedication and the amazing work they do. And it's recognized, and we work very hard for this, but there are organizations that kind of rate charities. And we just got upgraded to platinum by GuideStar. With Charity Navigator, we've been in the 3 to 4 star range for the last few years, even though they keep raising the bar. And last year, for the first time, they gave us a perfect 100% rating on transparency and governance. So we're very proud of that. So it's very important to look at those third-party evaluations. And then last but not least, something that's really exciting to me is what's called this multiplier effect. Because we work with partners, and the heart of our strategy is that when we spend $1, it's really to incite partners to come in and spend 10 times more at least. So when you give $1 to STAR, obviously we take good care of it, it's spent very wisely, but also it brings in partners that spend the big money, and our partners that spend tens of millions of dollars in CMT. And this multiplier effect is really important because, again, we don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars that it takes to develop the drugs. All right, it's time to wrap up. Exciting times, but at the end, I mean, we're not done yet. And this is a very challenging, but also a very personal journey. That's why I wanted to show a picture of Yohan here, my little hero. He didn't choose to have CMT. But he's the reason why I'm involved, why we're involved, and why we're passionate around this. And I think for all of you on the phone, I'm sure it's the same thing. You all have a personal journey. So the point I want to make is 10 years ago, when we looked at the situation, I mean, it was bleak. I mean, it was like staring into the abyss. There wasn't much to do. It's not the case anymore. There's tons of things everybody can do. Everybody can join the movement. I mean, please get involved. Everybody has a role to play. Those are exciting times, but there's a lot of work to do, and we need everybody on board to help us here. So, we do tons of things. We have branches, we have fundraisers, we have walks. Please make CMT your cause and help us. And also help yourself. I mean, make sure to join the ANC patient registry, so you'll be there when clinical trials come along. Go visit a center of excellence and go again. This is how we get a natural history. It's really important, especially for the less common types of CMT. We need more and more patients that will be ready for clinical trials. And then when I started working on nonprofits, people told me about the 3 W's, and I think it applies to everybody. So we can all help through work, through wealth, and through wisdom, and hopefully all 3 or a combination thereof. And then, all together we'll move this forward. So big thanks to everybody for all your help, for putting up with me and with us that late. And then basically we're going to turn over to Bob for questions. I just want to show a few resources on the web. I'll just leave this up as we go through questions. But the patient registry, the clinical trials, the ClinicalTrial.gov website is really well done. More information on our CMTA website. We just launched our annual appeal for the end of the year, so please help us. We have a huge match here, so everybody can participate. Make sure you sign up for e-news and make sure you follow us on Facebook. All right.
That was, I don't know, I'm going to have to watch that about 3 more times to make sure I got it all. I understand there's a lot of people who have asked questions this evening about clinical stuff. I just want to say my response to you, I will get those questions off to the folks at the CMTA, and we'll get answers to you as best we can on that. We did have a question, Gilles, that came in on ACE-083. I might have missed it while you were doing your presentation, and someone was asking if there's any more progress on that.
Yeah, so that's the drug from Acceleron. So basically, they are recruiting 1A and 1X patients for clinical trials, and we've been actually doing some work with them on animals, which was quite promising. So I think they're going to do a small phase 2, and then if it goes well, they'll do a phase 3. So that's really moving along very well.
Okay. And we had another question about the companies who are kind of blinded here. Will they be coming forward with what they're working on at some point in the future, or is that just they want to remain anonymous that way?
No, obviously the idea is to become public. Is just, you know, we need to respect their not their privacy, but their confidentiality. And you know, often the companies are reluctant to go public until the work's been published, because it then becomes available to their competitors. And also from our perspective, you know, I want to be a little careful about announcing too much stuff until we get results. I mean, I think there's sometimes a tendency to be over optimistic and announce a lot of things. And as you know, I mean, as I said, 90% of the stuff doesn't work. So we also have a bias to maybe wait until there's results to share them. So we share them with also the company. So, but the idea obviously is to go public as soon as it makes sense.
Okay, good. Someone also asked, what's the difference between the INC registry and the other patient groups registries that exist out there? Is there one that you guys really want us to be registering with, or is it like more of a spectrum of places we should be registering in our?
Yeah, no, the INC registry is part of this larger organization called the RDCRN, which is NIH funded, and their role is to really encourage progress in all rare diseases. So it is the place to go, and it's really important for everybody to be in the INC/RDCRN registry. It doesn't hurt to be any other, but this is the one where we need everybody to go, because this is again the one that really matters, because it's the one that's sponsored by the NIH, where that's used by all our key partners to gather data. It's actually becoming incredibly helpful to the companies we have. We have thousands of people in there. But remember, it's not just being in the registry. You also have to go to the centers and try to get into this natural history studies, because those can be extremely helpful as well, especially for the less common types of CMT. Okay,
I think that's all the questions we have for this evening. So just want to say thanks so much for an hour of your time. I'm sure it took you a long time to create all those slides. It was really enlightening for me here, and I'm sure for everybody who was with us this evening. I'll give you a moment if you want to say anything else before we cut it off.
No, Bob, I want to thank you for putting this together, and I want to thank everybody for attending. I mean, I think you can sense my excitement, and I think, like all of us, this is a very exciting time. And we're all in it together. But there's a lot of work left to do, so let's roll up our sleeves and move forward, and we need everybody's help. So thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks very much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye, good night.